George Santos faced 23 federal charges for stealing 11 identities, and a judge ordered him to pay $373,000 in restitution. The man behind all of it is not some shadowy figure operating in the dark. He is a United States Congressman, sitting in the halls of power, voting on legislation, shaking hands with constituents, and smiling for the cameras. His name is George Santos, and he fabricated his entire life story to win a seat in Congress. Then, he stole the identities of elderly donors, some of whom were suffering from dementia, and he charged their credit cards without their knowledge. He was the 6th member of Congress ever expelled, and a federal judge gave him 87 months, which was the maximum allowed. He served 3 months before the president set him free. This is the story of the most brazen fraud ever to sit in the United States House of Representatives. In November 2022, voters in New York's 3rd Congressional District believed they were electing a self-made success story. George Santos's campaign website described him as a polished Brazilian-American financier. It listed him as a graduate of Baruch College and New York University, and a former vice president at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup. His website also claimed he was a descendant of Holocaust survivors whose grandparents fled persecution in Ukraine, settled in Belgium, and escaped again during World War II. It called him a devoted son whose mother survived the September 11th attacks at the South Tower. Every single one of those claims was a complete lie. Representatives for both Goldman Sachs and Citigroup told reporters they had no record of his employment. Baruch College confirmed no degree had ever been awarded to anyone by that name. Immigration documents showed his mother was not even in New York on September 11th, 2001. His grandparents were born in Brazil, and there was no connection to the Holocaust whatsoever. But the donors did not know any of this because they believed in George Santos. Some of them were elderly, and some suffered from cognitive impairment, including a woman with brain damage and 2 men in their 80s. They gave their money and their trust to a man who would betray both. In 11 cases, they also gave Santos their personal identities, which he would use to steal from them. The stakes of this story go beyond one congressman because they raise a question that should concern every voter in this country. Can a man lie about everything and steal from his own supporters and face the maximum sentence and still walk free in 90 days? George Anthony DeVolder Santos was born on August 22, 1988, in Queens, New York. His parents were Brazilian immigrants who had settled in the borough years earlier. He did not graduate from any college or university, and he never set foot inside Goldman Sachs or Citigroup as an employee. When confronted about it later, Santos told reporters it was a poor choice of words and claimed he had worked for a company that did business with both firms. Both Goldman Sachs and Citigroup denied that he had ever worked for them. Santos first ran for the 3rd District seat in 2020 and lost. He ran again in 2022 with an entirely new biography and a fabricated resume designed to fool the suburban voters of Long Island and Queens. Santos flipped a Democratic seat and was hailed as part of a Republican wave across New York. On January 3, 2023, George Santos was sworn into the 118th Congress. But 19 days before he took that oath, on December 19, 2022, the New York Times published an investigation that would begin his unraveling. Reporters could find no record of his degrees, no evidence of his Wall Street career, and documents contradicted his family heritage claims. Santos went on television and dismissed the report as a political attack. He told interviewers he had merely embellished his resume, and he said, "I am sorry," but he refused to resign. Republican leadership in the House, including Speaker-designate Kevin McCarthy, chose not to challenge his seating. What no one knew yet was that the resume lies were the least of his crimes. Behind the polished fiction of his public life George Santos was running a criminal enterprise, and it targeted the very people who believed in him. The criminal schemes that prosecutors would uncover operated on 3 fronts simultaneously. The identity theft and credit card fraud was where it all started. Beginning in July 2020, Santos and his associates obtained the personal identifying information of at least 11 campaign contributors. Among them were elderly individuals with cognitive impairment, and among them were members of his own family. He did not discriminate between elderly donors, his own family, and strangers. Santos used their identities to make unauthorized charges on their credit cards and funneled the money into campaign accounts, into political committees, and directly into his personal bank account. In one case, he charged $15,800 to a single donor's credit card and transferred most of it straight to himself. Across all victims, prosecutors documented more than $44,000 in unauthorized charges between July 2020 and October 2022. To hide the fraud and get around federal campaign contribution limits, Santos falsely reported to the Federal Election Commission that these contributions had been made by other individuals rather than by the cardholders whose cards he had stolen. Santos was also running a campaign fraud on the side. He and his campaign treasurer, Nancy Marks, devised a plan to inflate the campaign's fundraising numbers by filing fake reports with the Federal Election Commission. Their most audacious fabrication was a $500,000 personal loan from Santos to his own campaign. The money did not exist, not a single dollar of it. But the inflated numbers made the campaign appear strong enough to qualify for support from the National Republican Congressional Committee, the party's main fundraising arm for House races. Marks later admitted she had fabricated contributions from family members on campaign filings to make the numbers add up. Santos also created a limited liability company and enlisted a political consultant to solicit donations from 2 individuals under false pretenses. Each donor transferred $25,000 to the company, believing their money would fund television advertisements for the Santos campaign. Instead, Santos transferred all $50,000 directly into his personal bank accounts. The advertisements were never purchased, and the donors never saw their money again. On top of all this, Santos was also committing unemployment fraud. On June 19, 2020, he applied for New York State unemployment insurance benefits and falsely claimed he had been unemployed since March 22, 2020. He filed weekly claims for nearly a year through April 2021 and collected a total of $24,744. During the entire period, he was employed as a regional director at an investment firm called Harbor City Capital and earning a salary of $120,000 per year. And here is the crazy part. Santos later co-sponsored the Protecting Taxpayers and Victims of Unemployment Fraud Act, a bill designed to crack down on the exact crime he committed. He stood on the House floor and voted for it. While Santos smiled for cameras in Washington, federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York were already building their case. Investigators were working even before the New York Times expose. On May 10, 2023, just 4 months after Santos took his seat in Congress, a federal grand jury indicted him on 13 counts. The charges included wire fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds, and making false statements to the House of Representatives. Santos pleaded not guilty, and he told reporters the indictment was politically motivated. Then his own people turned on him, and the first to flip was Nancy Marks. On October 5, 2023, Marks walked into a federal courtroom in the Eastern District of New York and pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States. She admitted that she and Santos had filed false reports with the Federal Election Commission. She confirmed that a $500,000 campaign loan was a complete fabrication. Marks told the court she had invented contributions from family members to give the appearance that Santos had exceeded the fundraising thresholds required for National Party support. 5 days later, on October 10th, prosecutors filed a superseding indictment with 10 additional charges, including 2 counts of aggravated identity theft and 1 count of access device fraud. The total now stood at 23 federal counts against a sitting member of Congress. 2 weeks after the superseding indictment, the House Ethics Committee released its report, and the findings were devastating. The committee found substantial evidence that Santos had sought to fraudulently exploit every aspect of his House candidacy for his own personal financial profit. But it was the details of his personal spending that caught the country's attention. Santos had used campaign funds to pay for Botox treatments, spending $1,500 at Mirza Aesthetics and $1,400 at Virtual Skin Spa in Jericho, New York. He spent $6,000 at Ferragamo stores and more than $4,000 at Hermes. He billed the campaign for a resort trip to Atlantic City, a $3,000 Airbnb rental in the Hamptons, and hotel charges in Las Vegas that staff members identified as his honeymoon. There was also an unreported payment of $1,029 to an esthetician in Rhinebeck, New York. The committee concluded that Santos's conduct was beneath the dignity of the office and had brought severe discredit upon the House. On December 1st, 2023, the House of Representatives voted to expel George Santos. The final count was 311 to 114, which far exceeded the 2/3 majority required under the Constitution. 105 Republicans joined 206 Democrats in voting to remove him. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Majority Leader Steve Scalise opposed the vote and warned it set a dangerous precedent by removing a member before a criminal conviction. Santos became the 6th member in the history of the House to be expelled and the first to be removed without being convicted of a crime. He walked out of the Capitol and told reporters he would seek revenge on every Republican who voted against him. For 8 months after his expulsion, Santos fought the charges in court. Then, on August 19, 2024, he returned to federal court and pleaded guilty to 2 counts: wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. As part of his plea agreement, Santos admitted to all of the conduct outlined in the superseding indictment: the identity theft, the credit card fraud, the fabricated campaign filings, and the unemployment scheme, all of it. He faced a minimum sentence of 2 years in prison and a maximum of 22 years. He agreed to pay $373,749 in restitution and $205,000 in forfeiture. On April 25, 2025, George Santos stood before United States District Judge Joanna Sabert for sentencing in federal court on Long Island. A tearful Santos told the judge he regretted defrauding the voters who supported him. New York Labor Commissioner Roberta Reardon spoke on behalf of the victims and the state. Prosecutors asked for the maximum sentence and described Santos's criminal career as a mountain of lies, theft, and fraud. Judge Seibert looked directly at Santos and told him that words have consequences. She said he got elected with his words, most of which were lies. She said she believed he was a talented man and that he had a future. Then she said it was incredible that he did not stop with the lies, and that it was incredible now that he tried to blame the government. She paused, looked at him again, and asked the question that would define this case. Where is your remorse? Where do I see it? She sentenced George Santos to 87 months in federal prison, the maximum allowed under his plea agreement, plus 2 years of supervised release. Santos reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Ferreton, New Jersey, on July 25, 2025. He was assigned to a minimum security camp housing fewer than 50 inmates, and he spent stretches of time in solitary confinement. He had been in prison for less than 3 months when the president intervened. On October 17, 2025, President Donald Trump posted on his social media platform that he was commuting George Santos's sentence, effective commutation. He wrote that he had just signed a commutation releasing George Santos from prison immediately. He described Santos as somewhat of a rogue, but argued that many rogues throughout the country are not forced to serve 7 years in prison. He praised Santos for having the courage, conviction, and intelligence to always vote Republican. The commutation did not come out of nowhere because allies had been pushing behind the scenes. In August, just days after Santos reported to prison, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene sent a letter to the White House calling his sentence a grave injustice and a product of judicial overreach. Representatives Lauren Boebert and Tim Burchett also pushed hard for his release. When asked in a Newsmax interview whether he would consider a commutation for Santos, Trump replied that no one had asked him, and someone finally did. At approximately 11 p.m. on October 17, 2025, George Santos walked out of the Federal Correctional Institution in Fairton, New Jersey. His family greeted him outside the facility after he had served approximately 3 months of an 87-month sentence. Trump's clemency order wiped out everything, not just his prison time, but fines, restitution, probation, supervised release, all of it. The $373,749 in restitution that Judge Sabert ordered Santos to pay his victims was gone with the stroke of a pen. Santos went on television the next day and told a reporter that if President Trump had pardoned Jesus Christ off the cross, he would have had critics. At least 2 Republican congressmen who had voted to expel him publicly criticized the commutation and called it a failure of justice. Meanwhile, Nancy Marks, the campaign treasurer who cooperated with federal prosecutors and helped build the case against Santos, was sentenced to 3 years of probation. She did not serve a single day behind bars. The woman who helped file false reports received probation, and the man who orchestrated the entire operation served 3 months. Consider the victims in this case and what they lost. A woman with brain damage whose identity was stolen by a man she trusted. 2 elderly men in their 80s whose credit cards were charged without their knowledge or consent. 2 donors who gave a combined $50,000 for television advertisements that were never produced. Voters across Long Island and Queens who elected a man whose entire biography was a work of fiction. The New York State unemployment system was defrauded of nearly $25,000 during a pandemic when millions of Americans genuinely could not find work and needed every dollar in that system. George Santos fabricated everything, including his education, his career, his family history, and his campaign finances. He stole from elderly donors with cognitive decline, exploited the identities of his own family members, and defrauded the government during a national emergency. He used campaign donations to buy Botox treatments and luxury goods at Ferragamo and Hermes. He was expelled from Congress and sentenced to the maximum, and he served 90 days. The system caught him, prosecuted him, convicted him, and sentenced him, and then a single signature undid it all. The question is not whether George Santos is guilty, because he admitted to everything. The question is what his story tells us about a system where a man can lie his way into Congress, steal from his own supporters, face the maximum sentence, and walk out of prison before his victims have finished paying their bills. This is Federal Watch News, and we are always watching.